In this piazza, St. Peter's Square, the heart of Christianity known to all the world's faithful, many times Pope Francis has issued an invitation to develop a profound theology of women, to define, understand, and interpret the feminine dimension of the Church. Welcoming this invite is a group of theologians and international experts brought together by the Magdala Conciliary of St. Basil's Parish in Toronto, Canada. This international seminar is arranged around the feast day of St. Catherine of Siena, April 29th, and is being held at the Pontifical Urban University, a beautiful campus which overlooks this incredible square. I am Deborah Castellano-Lubov, Vatican correspondent. Now let's take a look inside. We are here today with Lucinda Vardy. Lucinda is a writer of feminine spirituality. She is a guardian of the Contemplative Women of St. Anne, a new lay community. And she is also a member of the Magdala Conciliary at St. Basil's Parish in Toronto, Canada. Lucinda, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are very interested in knowing what were your reasons for having this conference here on Vatican territory?
Well, it wasn't really a reason as much as a call, a response to the Pope's invitation quite early in his papacy that we need to define the feminine genius and define the feminine dimension in the Church. And because I had been probably for about 30 years studying and writing about women and women's spirituality, I felt that I might be the person to respond, if not you, who. And so I prayed about it and waited, and it's when the right time came, I came to Rome and knocked on a few doors, and the doors opened very quickly, which for me was a sign of the Holy Spirit being with us and directing me that this was what the will of God was. So that's how it started. Yeah.
So it came about through prayer, more or less?
Absolutely, yes. It is, and I always find the best things do because they're the things that last. And also you need to know God's will. So I had to know that this is really what God wanted and not something that I thought was a good idea.
Exactly. And who else helped you make this possible? And how did it come to fruition?
Well, it was here in Rome. It's very clear it had to be in Rome. It had to be in the center of or if you like, the head office of our Catholic faith. And so I was directed to meet Lucia Scarafia, who is very well known in the Vatican and also involved in the women's page on the L'Osservatore Romano, which is the Vatican newspaper. And so I met her, actually, it happened to be on St. Mary Magdalene's feast day. We didn't arrange it that way, but the heavens seemed to. And so we met at a kitchen table. We had lunch together, she and Julia Galeotti, also from the newspaper, who's also a translator. And we just started talking about the saints and about the women's saints particularly, and on this call. And at the end of our lunch, Lucetta said, well, when are we doing it?
Absolutely. Well, Pope Francis always says, buon pranzo, wishing everyone a good lunch, and all of this started over a discussion that took place at lunch.
That's right. Like a lot of women's work, especially new work, begins in the home, you know, around the table. So we weren't any exception to that.
There have been many courageous women throughout church history. This is centered on St. Catherine of Siena. Why is she sort of the protagonist, the inspiration?
Well, you just can't beat her, actually. That's why. She really is a woman's best friend. I saw that written once. She's a woman's best friend because she, first of all, is an archetype. She shows what's possible when everything seems impossible. Mm-hmm. So for a woman to come out who's illiterate, who just prays, and has a call and actually changes the course of church history and affects a view that it is possible for a woman to travel, it's possible for a woman to speak to a pope, it's possible for a woman to make a difference within the church. So Catherine of Siena really is the model of change, the model of what's possible, the model of we can do it in the feminine way, it doesn't have to be another way. So Catherine of Siena for me particularly, is inexhaustible. Her theology is so comprehensive and so complex that it's only about now of any effect, and that her example is to set the world on fire. That's what she said she was wanting to do. So how do we set the world on fire in a gentle, feminine way?
Not just women were interested in this gathering. In fact, at the start of the conference, a priest, a Vatican official from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, said that men and women, if they work together to reflect on their faith and contribute to theology, it would be a great blessing for the Church. We are here with the first ever woman to be awarded the Ratzinger Prize for Theology, Dr. Annemarie Pelletier. If you could please speak about this immense honor to have won this prestigious award in theology.
Ce prix a été une surprise, une grande surprise.
This prize was a surprise, big surprise.
Par modestie personnelle, mais parce que j'ai eu la conviction au moment où ce prix m'arrivait.
I don't say so out of personal modesty, but because I had the conviction at that moment when it happened that many women could have been awarded this prize.
Je suis sensible depuis très longtemps.
I have been sensitive for a long time to what women do,
ce que sont les femmes.
Who they are in the world,
dans l'Église certainement,
in the church of course, but in the world generally.
Et je dois dire que je suis très admirative.
And I really admire them because I tend to think the work they do is hidden.
Silencieux, souvent caché, mais dont j'ai tendance à penser qu'il tient le monde debout. Et donc, lorsque ce prix m'est arrivé, ma première pensée
so when the prize was given to me, my first thought was that the prize was not to honor me,
mais un honneur pour toutes
but to
ces
honor
femmes
all the
invisibles
invisible women.
Dans l'histoire de 20 siècles
In the
de christianisme,
2,000-year history of Christianity, which is complex and where women have gained a lot from the church,
on leur a peu donné, pour ne pas dire pas donné.
However, we did not give them the possibility of being the voice of the church. And so the men often became the voice of the women.
Pas toujours en connaissance de cause, mais
and sometimes women have been given far less the possibility to express themselves.
Et de contribuer ainsi à une intelligence de la foi,
and therefore to contribute to the intelligence of the faith and to the knowledge of God, which passes through the experience of the women.
Je pense pas qu'il faille, je suis même certaine qu'il ne faut pas opposer les hommes aux femmes.
The point isn't that men and women oppose each other. We are all created as unique beings in relationship and in dialogue with one another.
Du coup, c'est aussi très important que nous soyons ensemble.
It is very important that we remain together in the search for God and in the way we do it.
Pour nous aider mutuellement à progresser dans l'intelligence des choses.
And together also to support one another.
You have a very prestigious and long list of theology studies and accomplishments. The fact that you are a woman, how has this contributed to all you have done in theology?
Je dirais que c'est une question que je ne me suis pas posée.
I'll admit I've never asked myself that question before, simply because I am a woman. I live like a woman, with all that that implies.
Expérience particulière, mais je sais très bien, puisque vous me posez la question, que le fait de vivre la condition humaine au féminin.
Yet I know, since you're asking the question, that living the human condition as a woman molds the way I look at life.
De voir le monde, d'être sensible à ce qui s'y passe, le fait d'être une mère et maintenant une grand-mère m'a donné aussi, je dirais, une intelligence
also, being a mother and a grandmother has given me a knowledge of life, of the complexity of life, that naturally influences my way of thinking and writing.
Je réfléchis et je peux écrire.
Again, it has nothing to do with opposing men and women.
Mais de prendre conscience que une vision du monde et une intelligence de Dieu qui ne passe que par le regard et l'intelligence.
But an understanding of the world and of God that is not exclusive to men.
Mutile en quelque sorte notre connaissance. Et donc, c'est ensemble.
Being man and being woman is different, all the while belonging to the same human family.
Mais c'est vivre cette humanité avec chacun
But to live out that humanity with our own unique traits and characteristics that we receive individually,
mais qu'on le reçoit aussi pour l'autre,
but also for others. That is to become a sign of what the other person needs to experience.
Je suis convaincue que les femmes doivent être dans l'Église le signe de
I'm convinced that women in the church need to be a sign of something very important that the men have yet to experience. And I'm very aware that being a woman, yet not having a priestly ministry, I become an imminent sign of what is the baptismal priesthood, which is a condition of everyone.
The healing mercy of the heart of Christ. Speaking about this at this conference was Sister Mary Matalin Todd, an American Dominican sister from Nashville, Tennessee, a theology professor who studied at Rome's Angelicum University and who was very involved in the preparations for the 2008 World Youth Day in Sydney, Australia. Would you briefly take us into what you spoke about during the conference?
The conference itself is trying to look at the project of responding to Pope Francis's request that we have a more profound theology of women in the church, but also a look into how have women contributed to the theological project of the church, not apart from or against the men in the church and the tradition of the church, but within it. So the organizers of the conference had this idea that if we could look at especially the lives and writings of the saints, we would have really profound insight into how have women expressed something that is essential to understanding the church in a fuller and deeper way. I mean, a theology of woman is a project of saying, what does God's revelation shed light on about woman? But to say a feminine theology is more to say, what in the experience of being woman in the church, what in the historical revelation to the female saints, is part of the theology of the church that is already there. So when we say intrinsic, it's not external coming in. It's something that's already in the riches of the church. The church has already canonized these things. The church has already declared these women as doctors of the church. And how can we unpack that a bit more so that we can say, this is an insight that women were able to bring to the church. I mean, the church is fundamentally deeply Marian.
No, exactly. And Pope Francis has declared this extraordinary year, this extraordinary Jubilee Year of Mercy. So, in particular, how is that so significant within this context on intrinsic feminine theology?
When we look at how the saints perceived the heart of Christ and what the female saints say about the heart of Christ, it's profoundly a message about mercy, about how the love of God is healing to the heart. So when I looked at a few of the saints, I started with Catherine of Siena and then went through St. Margaret Mary's writings and the writings of St. Faustina Kowalska. I was thinking about how come Jesus revealed to women in a special way the mystery of his heart. And really thinking, I wrote my own dissertation on the thought of John Paul II and his document Mulieris Dignitatem, and trying to bring that forward with the questions that are emerging now. And one of the things that he says is that women have a way of responding to Jesus that is very total. When John Paul II looked at this, he said, look at Jesus on the cross. When he's pouring out his mercy most fully, the women had a particular strength for being with him in his suffering. And this idea that women have historically always been able to meet humanity in its suffering in a very profound way.
Expressions of the heart of women in Scripture and Asian interpretation. Here to speak with us is Sister Jude Galares, theology professor at the Institute for Consecrated Life in Asia, If you could just briefly explain for those watching a little bit about your intervention and what you had shared to all of the participants here.
What I did is to look at the scriptural meaning, biblical meaning of heart from the Hebrew and Greek cultures. And we discover that the heart is not just a physical heart, but it's the center not only of the emotions, but also of thinking and of wisdom. And it is also the very center of who the person is, the inner self, the inner core of the person, who he or she is before God.
We are here with Julia Galeotti, historian, journalist, head of the Cultural Affairs section of the Vatican newspaper L'Osservatore Romano. April 29th marked the feast day of St. Catherine of Siena, who's at the heart of this gathering. So last night, the participants had gone to Santa Maria sopra Minerva for the Mass being held on her feast day. What's the emotion of a moment such as that?
Well, I think that St. Catherine is a unique figure in history, in the history of the Church, because she has been a woman that went there and taught and argued with the Pope, reminded the Pope what his work was. So I think that St. Catherine is really a model for us, even in her choice not to be in a family, but not to be in a religious organization, but to try another way. So I think that we don't have anything common with St. Catherine, that is a marvelous figure, but the strength that she has had in her life to build what she thought that was important is really a model for us in our small world.
And when the Church speaks of feminine theology, what is it referring to?
Well, I think that when we think that, in the Bible it said that God created man and woman as two different people, two different identities, it is vital. We have always to remember that, and maybe the Church has lost that that remembrance, because the way in which women look at the world is completely different to the way in which men look at the world. And the way in which women read the Bible and the Gospel and so on is different, because we are different. So what the Church needs and what is really important, it's vital for the Church, because or else, like she's blind in half of the way, is to hear the voice of the woman. Jesus was somebody who really was there to listen to what women had to say in many ways. But then the Church, I think, has lost this tradition. So what is really important today for the Church to be vital, to be significant, is to remember that half of the world is made of women, and the women look, think, and live different from men. Not better or worse, it's just something different.
We are overlooking beautiful St. Peter's Basilica and St. Peter's Square, and we have with us today two lovely young women. We have Liana Cappiello and Emily VanBurcham, both of St. Basil's Parish in Toronto, Canada. Liana currently serves as their social and community coordinator and has been part of the permanent observer mission of the Holy See to the UN in New York, whereas Emily is serving as their sacramental and liturgical coordinator and has been a delegate of the Canadian Bishops' Conference during ecumenical meetings. Ladies, thank you so much for being here with us today. How has this experience been for you? Tell us a little bit about how you became involved with the Magdala Conciliary.
Well, it started about a year ago, so it feels like a long time in the making, and we're just so excited to be here now and to actually be experiencing the conference and meeting so many incredible women and men who have so much to offer the church. And we believe this is a conversation worth having, so this is the best time for it.
And the saints, specifically St. Catherine of Siena and the other female saints, how have they been protagonists? How have they been inspiring you personally and the other women?
Never grown closer to Mary Magdalene because as Magdala is named after kind of our exemplar, her witness post-resurrection is what inspired us to write our prayer and our poetry and our talk, really. And St. Catherine being on her feast day, I mean, she's just been everywhere. We saw her body, we'll be seeing her head in Siena. That's my nerdy favorite part. But being in the place where she was is very humbling.
Mm-hmm. So I feel St. Catherine is definitely present, watching over us throughout today's meeting.
How has your experience been in Rome so far?
Yeah, it was our first time, so we were pretty excited to explore. We aimless wander, so we were just, you know, hanging around, and the Basilica was stunning. I mean, to see it in person is quite an experience.
Being in Pope Francis's...
It would be cool if we had an audience, but I don't know if that's in the cards this year.
Right. While slightly different, perhaps, than what Liana hoped for, and as participants were busy with their work, they almost got the best of both worlds, because by Saturday morning, thanks to the Jubilee year, Pope Francis was pretty close to them. As the participants entered and were working, one could hear the bands playing, crowds cheering, and Pope Francis's encouraging words from their very window.
We are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We beseech you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God.
Intellect of the Heart, Edith Stein, From Agnosticism to Faith. Speaking about this today was Dr. Hanna Barbera Gerl-Falkowitz from Bavaria, who is actually an editor of the works of both Edith Stein and Romano Guardini. If you could briefly take us into the wisdom you shared with all the participants about Edith Stein.
Yeah, Edith Stein in her youth was an agnostic. With 14 years she decided not to pray any longer, just finished. But later on her life was outright successful. She studied philosophy, she was a master student of Husserl and so on. But during the First World War, what was the first catastrophe for Europe, the whole generation of the students somehow was shaken in their agnosticism. And so she was seeking for something what was a bigger whole than just intellect. And in a way she wandered 3 years through Christian literature, through Jewish literature and so on. To shorten that, it took her 3 years to cross this desert of inner loneliness, and at the very end by reflection also. She was reflecting, where do I come from, why do I have to die? A lot of her commilitones did not come back from the war, and so this generation was so shaken in their self-understanding life. And then she, by reflection, came to the idea that there should be a God, to say it very, very shortly. And then she had some friends who also took her by hand and went with her to the faith. And then she was baptized in 1922. And I think it's a very modern example because she's an intellectual just by all her outfit. And you cannot fly blindly into the faith. I think that is not possible, in 20th century anyhow not. And so you have been taken by some idea to follow that, to develop it, to discuss it. And her first conversion, in a way, was an intellectual conversion. Because of that, she's so near to us, I think.
What is the point of this conference in the sense that there's 2 others that are following this year's? So what is the goal? What is the outcome? What fruit is it producing?
The 3 items are, now it is heart, next year it's tears, and then it's fruits. I think I like it very much. I was not in the inventive group, but I like this. It is like peng, 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 you know. You can't have sentences and whole declarations, but you have something very, very irritating on one moment, but attracting on the other one. And so I think it's very good.
poetry have a place in discussions about feminine theology? Apparently so. Speaking with us about this is Elena Buia-Rat, who is a collaborator of the Jesuit magazine La Civiltà Cattolica and L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper, and has worked many years for the Italian television station, the RAI. In a room full of feminine theologians, you're speaking of a poet. How is this significant and how is it contributing to this theme?
Yes, Mary Oliver is not a theologian. She doesn't even belong to an institutionalized religion, but she's an artist, she's a poet, and she's a Pulitzer Prize winner poet. And according to me, her poetry is full of spiritual insights, and that I would like to join in this conference with the other participants. And the heart in her poetry is the place of discernment. Discernment is a Jesuitic word that I'm very familiar with and I find very specific in her poetry. And the heart in Mary Oliver poetry is the possibility to catch, to reach the mystery of God.
Well, there you have it. These women are one step closer toward an intrinsic feminine theology. They have gathered together from all over the world to be here behind St. Peter's Basilica and to respond to Pope Francis's invitation to do so. While much has been accomplished, still we are just beginning. For this international seminar, we'll continue for the next 2 years. It has been a pleasure having you here with us today. Again, this is Deborah Castellano-Lubov reporting from Rome. I hope to see you next year.